good morning, good afternoon, good evening, según la hora que me estés viendo. Hello, how are you? How are you doing? Everything okay? How are things going? How's it going? ¿Qué tal la cosa? ¿Cómo va la cosa? How is it? How's it going? Yeah. How's the weather today? How's the weather? Is it raining, snowing, cold, hot? How are you doing? ¿Qué tal estás? How are you doing? Hi, how are you doing? All right. Frequency adverbs from yesterday. I always wear a shirt. I always wear a shirt in this studio. I always have a black microphone in my shirt. I always have an artistic microphone dentro de mi alcance, within my reach, over there. I always look at the camera when I speak, but sometimes I look at Marta. She's next to the camera and behind the camera. She's not directly behind the camera. She's behind the camera and to my right, not to your right. Marta's behind you. Marta's not detrás de ti. Marta's behind you, but she's in front of me. You are sitting in front of me. You're looking at me. I'm looking at you. We're looking at each other. Now I'm pointing at you, but you're not pointing at me. Now I'm pointing at myself. Now I'm pointing at myself with both hands. Now I'm turning the pages of the book. And now I'm still turning the pages of the book. And now I'm still turning the pages of the book. And now I'm not turning the pages anymore. Now, no. Now I'm holding my hands together, pointing at you, looking at you, and speaking to you, and teaching you English. Page 109, frequency adverbs. Frequency adverbs. How often? ¿Con qué frecuencia? How often? How often? How often do you go to the moon? I never go to the moon. No me han invitado nunca. I never go. A la luna? No, I never go. How often do you go to Germany? I never go to Germany. Never. How often do you go to France? I go to France about once a year. How often do you go to England? Or how often do you go to the United Kingdom? I go to the United Kingdom about once a year. How often do you go to the States? I go to the States usually. I usually go to the States once a year. But occasionally, I go to the States twice a year. How often do you go to Andalusia? I go to Andalusia about once a year, occasionally twice a year, maybe. How often do you go to Barcelona? I go to Barcelona about 3 times or 4 times a year. How often do you go to Valencia? How often? I go to Valencia about 3 or 4 times a year. How often do you go to Valladolid? I go to Valladolid about twice a year. How often do you go to Santander? I go to Santander about once a year. Okay. I occasionally go. Always. Almost always. What's the opposite of black? The opposite of black is white. What's the opposite of big? The opposite of big is small. What's the opposite of long? The opposite of long is short. What's the opposite of tall? The opposite of tall is also short. What's the opposite of intelligent? The opposite of intelligent is dumb. Con B muda al final. What's the opposite of expensive? The opposite of expensive is inexpensive. Me gusta más que cheap. Economical, con AL, un artículo económico que no cuesta mucho. Economic significa referente a la economía. Ahora, economical means barato, o sea, un coche económico. Economizar. Ahora bien, the opposite of expensive is cheap, correct. I prefer inexpensive or not expensive because cheap, barato, often or usually has the connotation of poor quality, low quality. Do you understand? Poor quality, pobre calidad, calidad pobre, poor quality, cheap, según el contexto. Pero cuidado porque es mejor decir, it's not expensive. Esta clase es muy barata. Bueno, this is a cheap class now. This class is not expensive. Solo estos libros, es lo único que cuesta. Y si no quieres comprarlos, pues tampoco. Entonces es barato, es gratis. Lo único precio que pagas es tu tiempo. Viéndome y siguiéndome. But I recommend the books. I recommend. De esa forma, me sigues. Hasta me puedes llamar la atención si salto un punto por despiste o algo. You can call my attention. Say, Richard, you forgot Unit 11.11, the verb to last. El verbo durar, to last. Eso lo vamos a ver mañana o pasado. All right. How often do you go to Santander? I often go. Be more specific. Be more specific. I go to Santander once a year. How often do you go to Texas? Oh, I go from time to time. I go to Texas from time to time. Richard, yes, be more specific. Okay. I go to Texas once every 2 years. Once every 2 years. 11 escrito. Escrito 11 se pronuncia como el número 1 con sonido de S al final. Once. Pero S dura, ¿eh? Once every. Una vez cada. Cada aquí no es each. Se dice every. Siempre. Once every 2 years. I go to Texas once every 2 years. Richard, yes. How often do you go to Valladolid? I go quite often. Quite often. Yeah, quite often. Quite? Bastante a menudo. To Valladolid, quite often. Yes. Well, be more specific. Okay, I go to Valladolid twice a year. 2 times. Twice a year. Once a year, twice a year. 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. A partir de 3, decimos, como en español, 3 veces al año, o a la semana, o al mes, etc. 3 times. 4 times. Existe la palabra thrice, pero es una palabra poética, es una palabra que se usa muy poco. Muy, muy poco. Es como decir aquí, allá y acullá. ¿Cuántas veces dices acullá en tu vida? Pues nunca, ni thrice. I go to Valladolid about twice a year. Richard, how often do you drink beer? I drink beer quite often. Quite often. Yeah. But be more specific. Que sea más, que especifique más, que sea más específico. Yeah, be more specific. I drink beer about twice a week. Twice a week. I usually drink wine. I don't usually drink beer, but I like beer. Yes, sir. Sobre todo cuando enseño montaña. ¿Ah, sí? Sí. ¿Qué tiene que ver la montaña con la cerveza? ¿Ah? No lo sabes. La pronunciación de la palabra montaña, mountain, mis amigos españoles soléis decir mountain. Y la única forma de cambiar vuestro vicio es de cerveza Mau, número 10, mountain. Mountain, 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 mountain. Okay? Mountain, mountain, mountain. All right. I drink beer maybe twice, maybe, a lo mejor, maybe, twice a week. And Richard, yes, how often do you come to this studio? Very often. I come to the studio very often. Richard, be more specific, please. Okay, I come to this studio about 4 days a week, 4 times a week. Every day, no. But probably 4 days a week. Right, Marta? Unos 4 días por semana. Como promedio, como media. As an average, como el golaveraje. Average es la media, el promedio. As an average, como una media, se dice en inglés. As an average, y todo. As an average. I come here, maybe 4 times a week. 4 times a week. How often do you go to Morocco? Not very often. Well, be more specific. I hardly ever go. I hardly ever go to Morocco. Casi nunca. Pero me gusta. I like going to Morocco. I've gone to Morocco 6 times in my life. But I hardly ever go to Morocco now. How often do you go to Italy? Desgraciadamente, casi nunca ya. Hardly ever. Unfortunately, I hardly ever go to Italy. How often do you go to Chicago? I hardly ever go to Chicago now. Once every 10 years. Once every 10 years, yes. How often do you go to the barber? Tengo que ir, How often do you go? How often do you go to the barber for a haircut? Not very often. Well, be more specific. How often? Once a month? Once every 6 weeks, maybe? Once every 2 months? I don't know. Richard, yes. How often do you use the pencils in the class? These pencils, quite often. But in this part of the method, quite often. Sometimes every day. In this part of the method, ya llegaremos, a la página 249. 249, Unit 23. Probably, in this part of the message, not very often, the pencils, only for review. Pero viene muy bien, I guess, para esta parte. Yeah. How often? Yes. Richard, yes. Are you always angry? Yo? Siempre enfadado? Always angry? No, I'm never angry. I'm always very nice. I never get angry. I'm never angry. I can know. I'm never angry. Yo nunca estoy enfadado. ¿Me has visto alguna vez enfadado? No. I'm never angry. I always have a wonderful disposition, a very calm disposition. I'm never angry. I never get angry. I'm always calm. I'm always tranquil. I'm always peaceful. Pacífico. Peaceful. Yes, I'm always on a level key. All right, always. I hardly ever lose my temper. Perder mi temperamento es perder los estribos. I hardly ever hit the table. I hardly ever hit the table. I hardly ever point at my students. Sometimes I point at myself, and sometimes I point at myself with one hand, and sometimes I point at myself with both hands. Sometimes I point at you, and with one hand, and sometimes I point at you with both hands, like now. Right now, I'm pointing at you. Now I'm not. But occasionally, I point at you, and occasionally, I point at myself. I hardly ever point at Marta, casi nunca. La señalo ella. Hardly ever. Hardly significa apenas. Ever es apenas alguna vez. Literalmente, casi nunca. I hardly ever. Yes, I hardly ever. Yes, I hardly ever point at Marta. But occasionally I point at myself. And sometimes I point at myself with both hands. Occasionally I point at the guitar, but not very often. How often? Once every 5 classes, I refer to the guitar. Me refiero a. I refer. Yo refiero. I refer to the guitar. How often? I refer or I menciono, o señalo. Sometimes I mention the guitar. Sometimes I point at the guitar. Sometimes I put a pencil on the guitar. So, how often? I don't know, maybe once every 5 classes. Yeah. I include the guitar. And how often, Richard, yes, how often do you refer to the microphone? Which one? This one or that one? This one or that one? The one on my shirt or the one over there? Which one? This one or that one? The big one or the small one? The black one or the silver one? Which one? El de plata? El de color plata o el de color negro? Which one? The black one or the silver one? The one here, right here, or the one over there? The one on my shirt or the one on the table? The big one or the small one? Which one? The big one. That one. The one on the table. The one over there. Yes, okay. I don't remember the question. What's the question? The question is, how often do you refer to the microphone? That one, right? Yes. How often do you refer to that microphone? I refer to this microphone, I think, in every class. Almost in every class. So I almost always, casi siempre, lo contrario de hardly ever. Casi nunca, casi siempre, casi nunca. Never, always. Hardly ever, almost always. Ojo, se admite almost never para casi nunca. Y se oye de vez en cuando. Pero se oye mucho, mucho más, hardly ever. Y creo que suena mejor también. Hardly ever. I almost always include my special microphone. Special microphone. Richard, yes. How often do you call the United States? I hardly ever call the United States. Richard, how often do you call the President of the United States? Hello, Mr. Trump. I never call the President of the United States. Richard, how often do you kiss a frog? ¿Cómo? What? How often do you kiss a frog? ¿Con qué frecuencia besa una rana? Yeah, every day. I kiss a frog every day. Siempre estoy buscando príncipes o princesas en el sentido de buscando nuevas iniciativas, nuevas oportunidades. Y para que te salga un príncipe o una princesa en tu oportunidad tienes que besar ranas. No todo sale bien, pero tienes que intentarlo. Sacar buenos barcos del puerto. Aquí tienes que construir barcos en dique seco. Otro. Algunos saldrán bien y wow. Y tienes una cosa muy preciosa a veces, pero exige trabajo, como aprender inglés. Richard, yes. How often do you teach English on the radio? I teach English on the radio every day during the week. But I don't teach English on the weekend, usually. I usually teach only during the week. I don't usually teach on the weekend. Richard, yes. How often do you go to the park? To the park? Like Retiro Park or... Yes, how often do you go to the park? I go quite often. Quite often, but specify. Be more specific. Okay. I go to the park twice a month, maybe 3 times a month. Do you live near the park? Yes, I live relatively near the park. Relatively. What do you mean by relatively? ¿Qué quieres decir? Por relativamente. What do you mean by? What do you mean by relatively? Well, I live 10 minutes from the park on foot. If I walked, well, it depends. If I walk quickly, it takes 10 minutes to get to the park, to the Retiro Park in the center of this city. If I walk Normally, it takes 15 minutes to get to the park. Llegar al parque, or to reach, alcanzar, to reach the park, to get to the park. So yes, I live relatively near the park. And excuse me, how often do you go? I go about 2 or 3 times. 2 times is twice. Se dice twice, escrito twice. 1 time is once. Escrito once, como la once, once. Pero ojo, se pronuncia once, como uno con un S fuerte de once. Ahora bien, si dices 1 time or 2 time, no problem. Es correctísimo. I go to the park 1 time a week. Perfect English. Se dice muchísimo más once a week. Once a week. Twice a week. Pero si dices 1 time a week, 2 times a week, bah, perfect. Ahora bien, cuando juntamos y decimos 2 o 3 veces, 2 o 3 veces por semana, no solemos decir twice or 3 times. Decimos 2 or 3 times a week. Y cuando 1 o 2 veces por semana, solemos decir once or twice. No 1 or 2 times. Pero es correcto, repito, 1 or 2 times a week. Once or twice. Once or twice a week. I go to the park, to the Central Park in Madrid, Retiro. I go about 3 times a month. 3 times a month. A month. How many months are there in the year? There are 12 months, remember? Y recuerda el truco para el plural de months. Los puristas me van a echar la bronca, pero tengo razón. Cuando los nativos decimos months en plural, la H desaparece, es como TS, months. How many months are there? Months. Claro, si lo digo lento y fuera de contexto, suena raro, pero de corrido, ¡pum! Cuando estamos hablando fast and furious, decimos months. Igual que clothes. Yeah, how many months do you wear these clothes? Months. Okay, so sometimes, vamos un repaso rápido. Always, siempre. Almost always, casi siempre. Lo contrario, hardly ever, casi nunca. Y por supuesto, never, nunca. Luego en medio tenemos usually, que es como suelo. Suelo venir aquí en coche. No siempre, pero suelo venir. I usually come. Usually. Y solía ir a la playa en los años 80. I usually went to the beach. Usually, generally, normally. I normally come here by car. I normally come here by car. I normally come here by car. Come here. Venir aquí. I usually come here by car. Se dice más usually que normally. Pero ojo, si dices, si normally te resulta fácil, quédate con ello. I often come here by car. Means a menudo vengo, pero muchas veces no. But sometimes come here by car. Well, no, it's not true. I sometimes come here by taxi. Occasionally. Occasionally. Occasionally significa de vez en cuando. From time to time. Every now and then, every once in a while, every so often. Son varias formas de decir de vez en cuando. Ya los veremos por aquí. Las muchas veces. From time to time es fácil y perfecto. From time to time. Occasionally. Occasionally. Seldom. Seldom. Mis alumnos seldom utilizan esto. Pocas veces. Pocas veces. Seldom. Seldom. Pero se usa mucho. Seldom. I seldom come here by taxi. Seldom. Hardly ever. Casi nunca. Y ya está. All right, ya está. Frequency adverbs. Once, twice, 3 times. We're covering everything. How often? Hemos cubierto el punto 10. Es largo, eh? Point number 10 is 2 pages. Point number 10. How often do you have lunch at home? I have lunch at home 3 times a week. Well, excuse me, during the week, during the working week. Fíjate una cosa. Durante la semana laboral, primero, un día hábil, un día laborable is a working day. Today is a working day. Okay. Now, la semana laboral, hay dos formas. The work week or the working week. During the work week. During the week means durante la semana. Entre semana. During the week no incluye sábado y domingo. Cuando decimos during the week. During the week. I have lunch at home 3 times a week. 3 times a week. How often do you play tennis? Now, I never play tennis. Before, yes, but now I never play tennis. How often do the Beatles play together? Now, they never play together. How often does it rain in this city? It rains in this city about, as an average, 5 times a month. It's raining, it's pouring, it's time for the class to end. See you in another class. Take care.